This is the Stick in the Mud podcast, episode 3. Today, we'll be talking about mud clients. Hey everyone, welcome to the Stick in the Mud podcast. I'm your host, Tark. If this is your first time listening, I'd just like to say thanks. The Stick in the Mud podcast released once a week on Wednesdays, except for today. And notes for the show can be found at www.stickinthemudpodcast.com. You can find us on iTunes and even follow us on Twitter at Mud Podcast. All the links are in the show notes, so let's talk muds. So this episode, we're talking about mud clients. What is a mud client exactly? Think about World of Warcraft. I know I use it for a lot of my examples, but it's something that everyone, or at least everyone that listens to this, ought to know about and can use as a frame of reference. You know that giant, now I think 50 gig file that you have to download before you can play World of Warcraft? Well, that's the game downloading the assets, as well as downloading the client for the game. However, MUD clients aren't required to play on MUD. Connecting to a MUD can be as simple as clicking on a link on a website and it'll launch the game inside of a web-based client. You could also potentially play on Telnet or the command prompt, depending on how you think of it. And a lot of people would consider that the pure essence of mudding. Mudding with no assistance, no training wheels. There are better ways to go ahead and get in there and start mudding. So, as far as mud clients are concerned, I'm probably just going to cover the two major ones for Windows. And then, of course, one of them is cross platform compatible. I'll also talk about what's available on smart devices, tablets, phones, and whatnot. So, for the first client that we've got available only on Windows is Mush Client. Now, Mush Client has been around since forever, as far as I know. Definitely since back when I started mudding. Now, Mush Client is kind of more, I would consider a power user ish MUD client. The reason being that if there's something you want to do in Mush Client, odds are you can probably make it do it. I've seen some pretty amazing setups with it. One of the best examples, I think, you can look at the built in clients for games like Ardwolf, which have a Mush client basically pre configured for you that has all the tweaks and necessary things that they think were important to their game. And ends up being a really good setup to start with. God Wars 2 is actually another game where once you connect to the game, I believe it'll actually download all of the custom stuff that the creator of that game put into place. And then once you get running, restart, I think is required. Then you end up with a very nice, polished interface that makes God Wars a lot easier to get into. Now, the big issue with Mush Client, the reason why I consider it more of a power user style client, is that there's not really a whole lot there out of the box. You've got the basic aliases, triggers, macros, that sort of stuff right there, easily available. But for some of the more advanced stuff, definitely going to take quite a bit of learning. And I've definitely bounced off that wall a couple of times myself. Now, you've also got for Windows a client called Mudlet. Mudlet's a newer client, been around and actually solid for a couple of years now. Definitely much less lifespan history behind it than Mush Client has. That has its pros and cons. On the one hand, well, since it is a bit more modernly developed, I've personally noticed that Mudlet tends to parse text a lot faster. It's very responsive as far as stuff comes in, triggers act on it, stuff goes out. Just it refreshes extremely quickly. Speed was definitely something in mind when they sat down and built Mudlet. Another advantage is, of course, that it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux, which to me, huge, huge advantage since during the day I might use 3, 4, 5 different computers with a mix of Windows, OS X, and usually Ubuntu installed between all of them. And so for me, where, hey, if I actually have a couple of minutes at work or want to take my lunch break to play, then I'm able to pretty much no matter where I'm at. Another advantage to Mudlet is that it has a lot more built-in functionality than Mush Client does. Of kind of big import to me is the built-in mapper. Works extremely well. I've used the mapping script to actually map out, games that don't have a map by default, and it works. Does take a little bit of reading, a little bit of tweaking to get it up and running, but once you've got it locked in, well, again, it just works. Another advantage is that it does support the out of band protocols by a lot of them by default. Out of band protocols, for again people that are new to the scene here, are basically channels that are hidden from the player seeing output being sent by the mud that gives extra information to the mud client that you can use to display things that normally you wouldn't really have ready access to. In the past, personally, I've used it for keeping track of various attributes, facts about my characters that aren't readily visible by the command prompt that's provided by default by the game. Now, something that both clients have in common is that they can both use Lua as the coding language to use scripts and whatnot with. And honestly, found Lua really easy to pick up, play with, just kind of get in there and start messing with it, and it works really well. Now, Mush Client does have an advantage in the scripting languages that you can use with it. You can use Lua, Perl, Python, little bit of Ruby support in there, Visual Basic, Tickle, PHP, and JavaScript. If you know any of those languages, then you would be able to do, yeah, anything that. So you would be able to do anything that you can dream up and you want to automate or just make your life a bit easier. Now, I know a lot of people say that this sounds like a lot of it is pro Mudlet, anti Mush client, or at least very lukewarm towards Mush client. And that would be a bit true. I do have a lot more experience using Mudlet. I've been using it since the pretty early days. And Mush client just never really clicked a whole lot for me. The couple of times I had tried to use it, it just really didn't impress me all that much. But again, that's kind of a personal opinion deal. A lot of people would say it's kind of one of those Coke or Pepsi choices. Which one you like depends on, well, what you grow up with. So, what it comes down to in the end, if it were me, I'd personally use Mudlet over Mush Client, but make your own decision. Try them both out, see which one you like the most. Now, as far as mobile devices go, on iOS, there's an app called MudRammer. I personally don't own an iOS device. However, I've heard nothing but good things about it from people that do have a iPhone, iPad, things of that nature. And for Android, probably the best client you're looking at there is Blowtorch, which unfortunately it's not great. It gets the job done, you can connect, but very little customization configurations available for it. And it's something I'd recommend more as a social keep in touch client than a get out there and go do stuff. Now, it is possible to get out there and go do stuff with it, but it's kind of like using a Swiss Army knife to do work on your car. Yes, you can do it, but why would you? Now, of course, there are many more mud clients out there than the ones I've talked about today. However, those are probably the two best ones to use for people just looking to get into the hobby. If you want to see a more comprehensive list, if you search on Wikipedia for mud clients, you'll come up with the results that'll show you all the different, well, maybe not all, but a large portion of the mud clients that are available for the various operating systems. So, if you decide that Mudlet or Mush client don't really do the trick for you, well, there's always more you can go find on there. And with that, I think that's going to end the episode. I'd like to go ahead and say thanks to Opie over at funcity.org for, being the sponsor of this podcast, taking care of the expenses for it, as well as providing tech support, getting the website set up, and everything of that nature. I'd also like to thank Sean Phillips. His channel is linked in the show notes for providing the intro and outro music. If you want to go ahead and give us a review on iTunes, or even, hey, just subscribe to the podcast, I'd appreciate it. Feel free to comment on the website, any suggestions you've got, or about topics that you'd like me to cover, and more than happy to take a look at it. Also, if you've been to the website and noticed the Skype icon up on the top of the page there, if you click on that and obviously have Skype, you can leave a voicemail for the Stick in the Mud podcast Skype account. And that's something that I would like to use to have let people share their thoughts on muds, their thoughts on the show, talk about their favorite moment from mudding, or really anything that you feel like calling, leaving a message for. So, again, feel free. It's just that Skype link up on the top right corner. And with that, that's the show. So, have fun out there